Welcome to Chilling True Horror, where we dive into the real-life nightmares that people have lived through, the kind that stick with you long after the lights come back on. If you've got a story about a ritual gone wrong, a curse that felt all too real, or something supernatural that's haunted you ever since, we'd love to hear it. Just shoot it over to chillingtruehorror@gmail.com. The email's right there in the description, and who knows, it might end up being narrated in one of our future episodes, shared with folks who get that same uneasy feeling. These tales come straight from people's own experiences. The stuff that's hard to shake, because it happened to someone just like you or me. Tonight, we're uncovering 3 true stories of cursed rituals, pulled from accounts that make you question what happens when you mess with forces you can't control. If the thought of these rituals already has you glancing over your shoulder, go ahead and smash that like button to let us know you're hooked, and subscribe so you catch every eerie upload we drop. The voodoo doll that destroyed a family. Hey everyone, let's jump right into our first story tonight. This one's about a ritual that started as a desperate act of revenge but spiraled into something that ruined lives, based on a real account from someone who lived through the aftermath in New Orleans back in the 1980s. It's called The Voodoo Doll That Destroyed a Family. Picture this. It was a hot, sticky summer in 1987, the kind where the air hangs heavy with the smell of magnolias and river water, and the streets of the French Quarter buzz with tourists during the day but turn quiet and shadowy at night. Maria was a single mom in her mid-30s, working 2 jobs as a waitress in a dingy cafe and cleaning houses on the side to keep a roof over her and her 2 kids. Heads a boy named Jamal, who was about 10, always running around with scraped knees from playing ball in the alley, and a little girl, Sophia, just 6, with big curious eyes and pigtails that bounced when she skipped. Maria's life wasn't easy. Her ex-husband, Carlos, had left her for a younger woman 2 years earlier, taking most of their savings and leaving her to scrape by in a cramped apartment above a jazz club, where the music thumped through the floors until the wee hours. She was bitter, the kind of bitter that simmers deep inside and turns into something darker over time. Carlos would show up every now and then, drunk and apologetic, promising child support that never came, and Maria would send him away with tears in her eyes, feeling that familiar knot of anger twisting in her gut. One evening, after a particularly rough shift where a customer stiffed her on a tip and her boss yelled at her for dropping a plate, Maria confided in her neighbor, an older woman named Miss Clara, who everyone in the building knew dabbled in the old ways voodoo, root work, the stuff whispered about in hushed tones at family gatherings. Miss Clara was in her 60s, with skin like worn leather from years in the sun, always wearing colorful headscarves and rings on every finger that clinked when she moved. She lived alone with her cats and a shelf full of jars containing herbs, bones, and things no one dared ask about. Maria had always been skeptical, raised Catholic with Sunday masses and prayers to the saints, but that night, exhausted and furious after Carlos had called to say he couldn't make Sophia's birthday because he was busy with his new family, she poured it all out over a cup of chicory coffee in Miss Clara's dimly lit kitchen, the air thick with the scent of burning sage and something earthier, like damp soil after rain. Miss Clara listened quietly, her eyes narrowing as Maria spoke, and then she leaned in close, her voice a low rasp from years of smoking hand-rolled cigarettes. "Child, sometimes the saints ain't enough. Sometimes you gotta call on the Loa, the spirits that walk between worlds, but you gotta be careful they don't give nothin' for free." Maria hesitated, her hands trembling around her mug, but the pain was too raw, the injustice too sharp. She thought of her kids sleeping in the next room, Jamal with his faded hand-me-down clothes, and Sophia asking why Daddy never came around. "What do I have to do?" she whispered. Miss Clara smiled a toothless grin and pulled out a small cloth doll from a drawer, handmade with rough stitches, stuffed with what felt like cotton and herbs that smelled sharp and bitter. "We'll make a puppet, a doll to bind him. You'll need something of Heisa hair, a nail clipping, even a button from his shirt. Then we curse it, tie his fate to it, make him feel the hurt he caused." The ritual happened that very night, under a waning moon that cast silvery light through the cracked window of Miss Clara's apartment. They sat on the floor in a circle drawn with white chalk, surrounded by candles that flickered in red glass holders, the flames dancing like restless spirits. Miss Clara had Maria bring a strand of Carlos's hair she'd kept from an old brush, tangled and dark. They pinned it to the doll's head with a rusty needle, and Miss Clara chanted in a language Maria didn't understand, a mix of French Creole and something older, more primal, her voice rising and falling like the tide. "By the power of Arzuli Daunter, by the crossroads of Papa Legba. We bind this man to his wrongs. Let his heart ache as hers does. Let his luck turn sour. Let the shadows follow him until he makes amends. Maria repeated the words, her voice shaky at first but growing stronger with each repetition, the anger fueling her like fire in her veins. They pricked the doll with pins, one for each betrayal. Maria whispering Carlos's name as she drove them in, feeling a strange rush, like electricity buzzing under her skin. When it was done, Miss Clara wrapped the doll in black cloth and told Maria to bury it under a crossroads at midnight, which she did, her hands dirty and cold, as she shoved it into the earth at an intersection near the river, the water lapping ominously in the background. At first, nothing seemed to change. Maria went back to her routine, serving plates of gumbo and beignets, tucking her kids into bed with stories of happier times. But a week later, Carlos called in a panic. His new girlfriend had left him, taking his car and half his stuff, screaming about bad luck following him everywhere. Maria felt a twinge of satisfaction, but also a knot of unease in her stomach, like she'd swallowed something sour. Then things escalated. Carlos lost his job at the dockyard after a freak accident where a crate fell and crushed his foot, leaving him limping with a cast that smelled of sweat and regret. He showed up at Maria's door one night, his face gaunt and eyes wild, begging for help. "Something's wrong, Maria. I keep seeing shadows in the corners, hearing whispers when I'm alone. It's like I'm cursed." Maria's heart raced. She sent him away, but that night, Sophia woke up screaming from a nightmare about a little man with pins watching her from the closet. Jamal started complaining of stomach pains, doubling over after meals, his small face pale and sweaty. The curse, it seemed, had spilled over. Miss Clara had warned her, the Loa don't always stay where you point them. But Maria hadn't listened, too consumed by her hurt. Now, the apartment felt wrong. Doors creaked open on their own. The air grew thick with the scent of decay, like rotting flowers left too long in water. Maria found the kids' toys arranged in strange patterns on the floor, circles and crosses that made her skin crawl. One evening, while cooking rice and beans, she pricked her finger on a knife, and the blood dripped onto the stove with a hiss that sounded like laughter. That night, Carlos called again, his voice hoarse and broken. "Maria, please, what did you do? I can't take it anymore. The shadows. They're whispering my name, telling me to end it." Maria hung up, her hands shaking, but guilt gnawed at her like a rat in the walls. She dug up the doll from the crossroads, the cloth damp and moldy, pins rusted with what looked like blood. She took it to Miss Clara, begging for a reversal. The old woman shook her head, her eyes sad. "Once you open the door, child, it's hard to close it without paying the price." They performed a cleansing ritual at dawn, burning the doll in a fire pit behind Miss Clara's building, the flames leaping high and hungry, filling the air with acrid smoke that burned Maria's eyes and throat. Miss Clara chanted prayers to Baron Samodi, the Loa of the dead, offering rum and cigars as tribute, her voice trembling for the first time Maria had heard. As the doll burned, Maria felt a weight lift, but not completely. Sophia's nightmares continued for weeks. Little drawings of stick figures with red eyes pinned to walls. Carlos survived, but he was never the same. He moved away, a shell of a man, whispering about curses to anyone who would listen. Maria raised her kids alone, but the experience scarred her. She started going to church again, lighting candles to St. Michael for protection, and warned everyone she knew about the dangers of meddling with voodoo. Years later, Jamal would ask about the old scars on her hands from that night, and Maria would change the subject. But deep down, she knew the curse had left its mark not just on Carlos, but on all of them, a reminder that some rituals don't end when the fire dies out. If this story about a ritual that backfired and spread like poison has you thinking twice about the power of revenge, why not share in the comments the one grudge you let go of before it consumed you? Your release might just help someone else break free from their own shadows. The voodoo doll that destroyed a family. This story comes from a real account shared by someone who grew up in the heart of Louisiana, back in the late 1980s, when voodoo was still whispered about in the back alleys of New Orleans, like a family secret you didn't dare speak too loud. It's based on what happened to a woman named Elina Ive, changed the names to protect folks. But the details are straight from her recollection, posted in online forums where people share their brushes with the occult that went horribly wrong. Alina was in her early 30s then, a hard-working nurse at a local clinic. The The kind of place where you'd see folks coming in with everything from snake bites to mysterious ailments that doctors couldn't explain. She lived in a small shotgun house on the edge of the French Quarter, with its peeling white paint and a front porch sagging under the weight of humid summers. The air always smelled like a mix of jasmine from the overgrown vines and the faint temps of the Mississippi River just a few blocks away. Alina had 2 kids, her son Marcus, who was about 8, always out playing stickball in the street with the neighborhood boys, his knees scuffed and his laugh echoing off the brick walls, and her daughter Leela, 5 years old. With curly hair she loved to twirl while sucking her thumb, still clinging to her favorite stuffed rabbit that was missing an ear from too many washes. Elena's life hadn't been easy. Her husband, Javier, had walked out on her a year earlier, leaving her to juggle shifts at the clinic while scraping together enough for rent and groceries. Javier was a mechanic, charming when he wanted to be, with that easy smile that had won her over back in high school, but he'd turned mean with the bottle, coming home late smelling like cheap whiskey and other women's perfume. The final straw was when she found lipstick stains on his collar and a motel receipt in his pocket. He'd been seeing a bartender from down the block, a younger woman named Rita who flaunted her curves like she owned the world. Elena kicked him out that night, screaming through tears as he packed a duffel bag. The kids hiding in their room with wide eyes, Marcus trying to act brave for his little sister. "You'll regret this," Javier slurred on his way out, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. Elena didn't cry in front of the kids. She held it together, making them pancakes the next morning like nothing happened. But inside, the hurt festered like an open wound, turning to anger that kept her up at night, staring at the ceiling fan worry lazily above her bed. One afternoon, after a grueling shift where she'd bandaged up a kid who'd fallen off his bike and dealt with a patient ranting about curses from a neighbor, Elena confided in her coworker, an older Haitian woman named Tante Marie. Tante Marie was in her 50s, with silver streaks in her braided hair and a necklace of tiny bones that clinked softly when she moved. She was known around the clinic for her herbal remedies, teas for headaches, poultices for burns, and whispers said she practiced the old ways, voodoo passed down from her grandmother who came over from Port-au-Prince. They were in the break room, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of stale coffee mixing with the antiseptic temps from the halls. Elena poured it all out, her voice cracking as she talked about Javier's betrayal, how he hadn't sent a dime for the kids, how Rita paraded around town like she'd won some prize. "I just want him to feel what I feel," Elena said, wiping her eyes with a paper napkin. Tante Marie listened, her dark eyes steady, then leaned in close, her voice a low murmur. "Share pain like that don't go away easy, but if you want justice, the Loa can help. They listen when the heart's broken. But remember, what you send out comes back threefold." Elena laughed it off at first, shaking her head as she clocked out and headed home, the sun setting in a blaze of orange over the rooftops. But that night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant wail of a saxophone from Bourbon Street, Javier's words echoed in her head. "You'll regret this." The anger bubbled up again, hot and unrelenting. The next day, she found herself knocking on Tante Marie's door after work. A small shotgun house tucked behind a retiring gate, overgrown with creeping fig and the faint scent of incense wafting out. Tante Marie welcomed her in without a word, leading her to a back room lit by candles in colored glass jars, red for passion, black for protection. The walls were lined with shelves of jars filled with roots, feathers, and dried herbs that smelled sharp and earthy, like the bayou after rain. "You sure about this?" Tante Marie asked, her face serious in the flickering light. Elena nodded, her throat tight. "He needs to suffer like I have." They started the ritual right there, under the watchful eyes of a statue of Urzuli Frida, the Loa of love and heartbreak, draped in pink silk with offerings of perfume and sweets at her feet. Tante Marie handed Elena a small cloth doll, sewn from scraps of fabric, stuffed with Spanish moss and herbs that pricked her fingers, graveyard dirt for binding, hot peppers for pain, and a pinch of sulfur for fire in the soul. "You need something of his," Tante Marie said, her voice steady as she lit more candles, the flames casting dancing shadows on the walls. Elena had kept an old shirt of Javier's, stained with grease from his shop. She cut a button from it and sewed it onto the doll's chest, her stitches uneven from shaking hands. As the clock struck midnight, they sat in a circle of cornmeal drawn on the floor, Tante Marie chanting in Creole, her words rising like smoke. "Baron Samedi, guardian of the crossroads, Bind this man's fate to this poppet. Let him feel the thorns of betrayal, the burn of loss, until he repents. Alina repeated the incantation, her voice gaining strength, picturing Javier's face as she stuck pins into the doll, one in the heart for the love he threw away, one in the leg for the steps he took away from his family, one in the head for the lies that spun in his mind. Each prick sent a jolt through her, like static electricity, and the room grew warmer, the air thick with the scent of melting wax and something metallic, like blood. When it was done, Tante Marie wrapped the doll in black silk and told Alina to bury it at a crossroads under the full moon, which was rising fat and yellow over the city that night. Alina slipped out, the bundle heavy in her pocket, her heart pounding as she walked the quiet streets, the hum of distant jazz fading behind her. She found a spot where two dirt roads met near the levee, the river murmuring softly in the background, frogs croaking in the reeds. Kneeling in the mud, she dug a small hole with her hands, the earth cool and damp under her nails, and placed the doll inside, covering it quickly as if afraid it might come alive. "Let him suffer," she whispered to the night. Standing up and brushing off her knees, a strange calm settling over her as she walked home, the moon watching like an unblinking eye. The changes started slow, almost unnoticed at first. A few days later, Javier called, his voice strained over the crackling line. "Alina, something's wrong. I twisted my ankle at work. Bad doc says it'll be weeks before I can stand on it." Alina hung up without a word, a small smile tugging at her lips as she stirred dinner for the kids, the aroma of jambalaya filling the kitchen. But then Marcus came home from school clutching his side, complaining of a sharp pain that made him wince with every step. The doctor said it was just a pulled muscle from playing too rough. But Elena's stomach twisted when she saw the bruise blooming purple on his skin, right where she'd pinned the doll's leg. "It's nothing, baby," she said, kissing his forehead. But her hands were cold as she tucked him in that night, the house creaking like it was laughing at her. Things got worse. Javier showed up unannounced one evening, limping up the porch steps with a crutch under his arm, his face pale and drawn, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool breeze off the river. "Alina, please, I need to talk. Rita left me, said I'm bad luck, that everything I touch falls apart. My truck broke down, my boss fired me for missing shifts. It's like I'm cursed." He stood there in the doorway, his eyes pleading, the streetlight casting long shadows across his features, making him look older, broken. Elena's heart fluttered with a mix of triumph and fear. She slammed the door in his face, but as she turned away, Sophia started coughing from the other room, a deep, rattling sound that didn't stop until morning. The pediatrician prescribed syrup, but the cough lingered, turning into feverish nights where Sophia whimpered in her sleep about a little man poking me with needles. Alina sat by her bed, stroking her damp hair, the room feeling smaller, the walls pressing in like they were alive. Panic set in when Marcus's pain didn't go away. He woke up screaming one night, his legs swollen and hot to the touch, the doctor muttering about infection from an unseen wound. Alina rushed him to the clinic, her mind racing as Tante Marie pulled her aside in the hall, her face grave. "What did you do, child? The Loa are tricky, they follow the blood, the ties that bind. If the curse was too strong, it spills over to those connected." Alina confessed everything, her voice breaking as she described the doll, the pins, the burial. Tante Marie nodded, her rings clinking. "We have to undo it, but it won't be easy. The spirits take their due." The reversal ritual happened under a new moon, the sky ink black with no stars, as if the heavens had turned away. They met at Tante Marie's, the room heavy with the scent of frankincense and myrrh burning in a brass bowl, the smoke curling like fingers toward the ceiling. Alina brought a lock of her own hair and one from each child, weaving them into a new doll, this one white for purity, stuffed with healing herbs like vervain and angelica that smelled clean and sharp. Tante Marie drew a vive on the floor, a complex symbol for Papa Legba, the gatekeeper, with flower that glowed faintly in the candlelight. "We offer amends," she chanted, her voice steady but strained, pouring rum into a shallow dish and lighting a cigar, puffing smoke over the symbols. Alina repeated the words, tears streaming down her face. "Release the binding. Forgive the wrong. Let the harm return to none." They burned the white doll in the fire pit outside, the flames leaping blue and green from the herbs, the air crackling with energy that made Elena's hair stand on end. As it burned, she felt a pull in her chest, like something unwinding. But then a sharp pain shot through her leg, mirroring Marcus's injury, and she collapsed, gasping. The next morning, Javier called his ankle was healing faster than expected, and he'd found a new job. Marcus's swelling went down, Sophia's cough faded to nothing, but Elena paid the price. She developed a limp that never fully went away, a constant reminder of the curse's backlash. The family moved out of New Orleans a year later, to a quiet suburb where the air was cleaner, but Elena never forgot. She threw away all her old keepsakes from Javier, started attending church every Sunday, lighting candles to St. Jude for lost causes. Years later, as an old woman, she'd tell her grandkids the story in hushed tones over sweet tea on the porch, her voice trembling. Don't ever mess with things you don't understand. The spirits don't forget, and what you send out always finds its way back. The experience shattered her faith in quick fixes, leaving scars not just on her body, but on her soul, a testament to how a simple ritual, born of pain, can curse not just the target, but everyone it touches. If the slow unraveling of this family's life from a single act of desperation has left you unsettled about the hidden costs of revenge, why not drop a comment sharing the one time you almost crossed the line but pulled back your restraint? Could remind others that some doors are better left unopened. The black candle binding that backfired. Let's move on to our third and final story for tonight. One that's rooted in a real account from someone who dabbled in what they thought was a simple binding ritual but ended up unleashing something they couldn't control. This happened in a small town in rural Georgia back in the early 2000s. Shared by a woman named Sarah, not her real name, but the details come from her own words posted in online forums where folks open up about their regrets with folk magic. It's called The Black Candle Binding That Backfired. Sarah was 25 at the time, working as a cashier at a local grocery store, the kind of place where everyone knows your name and your business, with shelves stocked high with canned goods and the constant beep of the scanner punctuating her days. She lived in a modest trailer park on the outskirts of town, surrounded by pine trees that whispered in the wind and dirt roads that turned to mud after every rain. The air always carried that earthy scent of damp soil, mixed with the faint smoke from neighbors' burn piles, and at night, the crickets chirped so loud it was like a symphony outside her window. Sarah was in a rocky relationship with her boyfriend, Derek, a truck driver in his late 20s with a temper that flared up after long hauls, leaving him exhausted and irritable. He'd come home smelling like diesel and fast food, snapping at her over little things like dinner not being ready or the laundry piling up, but then he'd apologize with cheap flowers from the gas station, promising it'd get better once he saved enough for that ring he'd been talking about. Their fights had been getting worse, though. One night, after Derek stormed out following an argument about money, he'd blown his paycheck on beer with his buddies again. Sarah sat alone in their cramped living room, the TV flickering with some late-night infomercial, the blue light casting eerie shadows on the paneled walls. She was scrolling through her old laptop, the fan whirring loudly like it was about to give out, when she stumbled upon an online forum about love spells and bindings. It was one of those sites where people shared homemade rituals, claiming they were passed down from grandmothers or learned from books on hoodoo and folk magic. Sarah had always been curious about that stuff. Her own grandma used to talk about root doctors in the family line, brewing teas for luck or burning candles to ward off bad vibes. Desperate and hurt, with tears staining her cheeks and the empty beer cans Derek left behind mocking her from the coffee table, she decided to try a binding ritual to make him stay faithful and calm his anger. The post described it as simple: bind your lover's wandering heart with a black candle, and personal items no harm done. Just ties him to you tighter. She gathered what she needed that very night, driving her beat-up Honda to the 24-hour Walmart under a sky full of stars that seemed indifferent to her pain. The store was nearly empty, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like angry bees, and the clerk gave her a sideways look as she checked out with a black pillar candle. Red string, a small photo of Derek from their happier days at the county fair, him grinning with cotton candy stuck in his beard, and a few drops of her own blood from a pricked finger, as the ritual instructed. Back home, the trailer felt colder than usual, the AC unit rattling in the window as she sat up on the kitchen table, pushing aside the stack of unpaid bills and a Hoffiton pizza from earlier. She carved Derek's name into the candle with a kitchen knife, the wax flaking onto the formica surface, and tied the photo around it with the red string, knotting it 3 times while whispering, "As this string binds, so does your heart to mine. No more wandering, no more fights, stay true or feel the bite." Her voice trembled. A mix of hope and hesitation, the words feeling heavy on her tongue like they carried weight she couldn't see. Lighting the candle at midnight, as the instructions said, she watched the flame sputter to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls that made the room feel alive. The scent of melting wax filling the air with a sweet, cloying smell that turned her stomach. She pricked her finger again, letting a drop of blood fall onto the photo, hissing as it stung, and chanted the incantation 3 times, "By earth and fire, by blood and bone, bind him to me, make him my own." The flame grew taller with each repetition, popping and crackling like it was responding, and Sarah felt a chill run down her spine despite the humid night, as if a draft had slipped through the cracks in the door. She let the candle burn for an hour, her eyes fixed on it, her mind racing with images of Derek coming home, apologetic, flowers in hand, promising to change. When it was done, she buried the remnants in the backyard under a scraggly oak tree, the dirt soft and loamy under her nails, the moon hidden behind clouds that rumbled with distant thunder. The next morning, Derek called from the road, his voice softer than usual over the static of the cell signal. "Babe, I'm sorry about last night. I miss you. I'll be home soon." Sarah's heart soared. It worked, she thought, smiling as she poured cereal for breakfast. The sun streaming through the curtains in golden rays that felt like a good omen. But by evening, when Derek pulled up in his semi-truck, the engine growling like an angry beast, something was off. He stumbled in, his eyes bloodshot not from drinking but from lack of sleep, complaining of headaches that pounded like drums in his skull. "Feels like someone's sticking pins in my head," he muttered, collapsing on the couch with a groan, the springs creaking under his weight. Sarah brushed it off as road fatigue, making him a sandwich with ham and cheese, the kitchen filled with the comforting smell of fresh bread. But that night, he tossed and turned in bed, moaning about dreams where he was tied down, unable to move, shadows whispering accusations in his ear. Days turned to weeks, and the binding's effects twisted in ways Sarah hadn't anticipated. Derek became obsessive, calling her every hour from the road, his voice edged with paranoia. "Where are you? Who are you with?" He'd show up unannounced at her work, staring through the window with eyes that seemed darker, more hollow, the other cashiers whispering behind her back. At home, he'd cling to her, his grip too tight on her arm, leaving bruises that she hid under long sleeves. The kids noticed. Little Sophia would hide behind Sarah's legs when Derek raised his voice, which happened more often, his temper flaring over Nathina's spilled drink, a TV show he didn't like. One night, during a storm that rattled the trailer with wind and rain lashing the windows like angry fingers, Derek woke up screaming, clawing at his chest, "Get it off me. The strings, they're choking me." Sarah held him, her own heart pounding, but in the lightning flashes, she swore she saw thin red lines on his skin, like thread burns that faded by morning. The curse rebounded harder. Sarah started feeling it, 2 sharp pains in her hands where she'd pricked her finger. Nightmares of being tangled in webs that pulled tighter with every struggle. Sophia came down with a fever that wouldn't break, her small body hot and sweaty under the blankets, whispering in her sleep about the doll man watching from the closet. Marcus found scratches on his arms after playing outside, deep enough to draw blood, with no explanation. The trailer felt oppressed. Lights flickered without reason. The air grew stale with a metallic temps, like old blood, and Sarah would catch glimpses of movement in Mira's shadows that didn't match her own. Desperate, she went back to the forum, reading horror stories of bindings gone wrong, people warning about backlash when the spirits demand payment. She confided in a coworker who knew about such things, a man named Mr. Leroy, old and wise, with stories of his Creole roots. "You tied him, but you tied yourself too," he said over coffee in the break room, his voice grave amid the clatter of dishes. "Gotta break the bond before it breaks you." The unbinding happened on a moonless night, Sarah sneaking out to Mr. Leroy's house on the bayou, the water black and still under the stars, frogs croaking in a chorus that sounded like warnings. His place was a shotgun shack with bottles hanging from trees to ward off spirits clinking softly in the breeze. They set up an altar with white candles for purity, offerings of cornmeal and honey for the ancestors, the air thick with the scent of bay leaves burning. Sarah brought a photo of herself and the kids, tying it with white string instead of red. Mr. Leroy chanted in a deep baritone, calling on Marie Laveau's spirit for mercy. Loosen the knots. Free the bound. Let the curse sink into the ground. Sarah cut the string with a silver knife, feeling a snap in her chest like a rubber band breaking, tears streaming as the pain in her hands eased for the first time in weeks. They buried the remnants in running water, tossing them into the bayou where the current carried them away, the splash echoing like a sigh of relief. Derek left soon after, packing his bags without a word, his eyes distant as if something had been cut loose inside him too. He moved to another state, sending sporadic child support checks, but never calling. Sarah and the kids healed slowly. Sophia's fever broke. Marcus's scratches faded to faint lines. But Sarah never forgot the way the ritual had promised control but delivered chaos, how her desperation had invited something dark into their lives. She threw away all her old books on magic, started volunteering at church, helping other single moms navigate their pain without shortcuts. Years later, she'd sit on her porch, watching her grandkids play, and shudder at the memory, warning them, some things you bind come back to bind you. Don't ever play with fire you can't put out. The experience left her with a limp in her step during rain and a wariness of mirrors, a constant reminder that curses don't discriminate, they consume everything in their path. If the twisting path of this ritual's consequences has you reevaluating the risks of seeking supernatural shortcuts, why not comment below with the one temptation you resisted that might have saved you from a similar fate? Your story could be the cautionary tale that guides someone else away from the edge. As we come to the end of these harrowing tales of cursed rituals, where desperation led ordinary people to tamper with forces beyond their control, it's hard not to feel the lingering chill of how a simple act of binding or revenge can unravel lives in ways no one sees coming. From the voodoo doll that started as a heartbroken mother's plea but poisoned her family with pain and guilt, to the black candle ritual that twisted love into obsession and rebounded with unrelenting torment, these real accounts show the dark side of seeking supernatural solutions, where the spirits demand more than you bargain for, leaving scars that time can't fully heal. They remind us that what begins in the flicker of a candle or the prick of a pin can echo through years, turning homes into prisons of fear and regret. Perhaps the true curse lies in the human heart's vulnerability, inviting shadows that refuse to leave once called upon. If the echoes of these rituals have stirred up questions about the thin line between intention and consequence in your own life, why not reflect in the comments on the one moment you felt tempted by something forbidden, and what held you back? Your honesty might just serve as a ward for others teetering on that edge. And if the raw intensity of these true experiences has gripped you from start to finish, show it by giving this video a thumbs up. It's your way of acknowledging the courage it takes to share such stories. Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell to stay locked in for our daily dives into authentic encounters with the unknown, delivered fresh every day. If a ritual or curse has touched your world in ways that still unsettle you, send the details to ChillingTrueHorror@gmail.com, right there in the description, and let us bring it to light for a community that understands. Sleep with one eye open tonight, and we'll connect again tomorrow for more truths from the shadows.